That was incredibly beautiful. Thank you. Good morning. It is good to be with you again. It is an honor to fill this pulpit for a few weeks this summer while Donna is on her sabbatical. And it's good to see familiar faces and not so familiar faces. It has been a joy the past 2 weeks to sort of be integrated into the life of this conversation, and y'all are just as awesome as I thought you were from my encounters with you in the past. So thank you for your welcome. Our text this morning is from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. Let us hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, I now say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. O Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and Redeemer. Amen. There's an old saying that persists because I think it's probably true. Nobody on their deathbed has ever said that they wish they had spent more time at the office. So what would you want to say on your deathbed? If you knew you were about to die, what would you tell the people you love? What cherished hope or dream would you share? What last urgent piece of advice would you offer? What last words would you hope that people remember? Now, we sometimes hear about last words uttered by famous people, and some of these words seem so well thought out as if they were meant to go directly into the history book. Here's a quote you probably know. "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." I'm pretty sure I learned that one in elementary school. Here's a last word from the famous baseball player Joe DiMaggio that is sort of poignant and sweet. "I finally get to see Marilyn again." Of course, he's referring to Marilyn Monroe. Now, here's somebody famous trying to restore her credibility at the very last minute. "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose." Now, obviously, the guy who was manning the guillotine was not impressed by Marie's repentance. And Winston Churchill was clearly over it and ready to meet his maker. "I'm bored with it all." And I don't even know what to say about Elvis's last words before he did indeed leave the building. "I'm going to the bathroom to read." And wouldn't you know it, George Harrison is the perfect entry point into our sermon today. Ever the poet, Harrison's last words are our first word today. Love one another. In our text from John 13 this morning, Jesus is speaking his final words to his disciples before he will be arrested and executed on the cross. Dinner is over. The hour has come. The crucifixion clock is ticking. And as we enter this story, Judas has just left the room to do what Jesus knows Judas will do: betray Jesus to the authorities. Now, Jesus knows that not only is Judas going to betray him, but Peter will also deny Jesus 3 times. And I have to believe that Jesus is already entirely aware that one by one, the disciples will sort of slip away into the darkness of Maundy Thursday. Not one of those men he ate with and talked with and prayed for at dinner will be present to witness Jesus' death. With the darkness and the betrayal all around him and the reality of his death looming before him, Jesus takes a deep breath and begins what we call the farewell discourse, which continues from this point in chapter 13 all the way through chapter 16. But first, I noticed what Jesus doesn't say in these final hours. He doesn't condemn Judas, does he? He doesn't condemn his disciples. Jesus' last words aren't believe the right things. Jesus doesn't say worship like this or attend a church like this. Jesus doesn't even say read your Bible or pray every day. What Jesus says is, I give you a new commandment. Love one another in the same way I have loved you. And it's not a suggestion, right? Actually, Jesus says loving one another is a command. Loving one another is a matter of obedience, stated by the Lord in words plain and clear. If the disciples love one another, everyone will see Jesus. And in Jesus, they will see God glorified. Now, this commandment in John is a little different from the greatest commandment we hear in the other Gospels. The commandment that shows up in Mark, Luke, and Matthew is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind or strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So in John, this is indeed a new commandment specific to this gospel, which is similar in spirit to the other command, but different. Jesus says to love one another. Its emphasis is not on loving your neighbor or the stranger or the guy you find beaten up on the side of the highway. In this new commandment, Jesus is talking to those already in his circle. He's talking to us, the church. Love one another. And in the farewell discourse that follows this text, Jesus expands upon what this love looks like and how the disciples' love for one another will glorify God. Now, in the context of the earliest churches, particularly John's sect who received this gospel, these words from Jesus were critical. These early Christians were already struggling within their community about doctrine and belonging and how to survive, let alone thrive, in the midst of empire. If these new Christian communities were going to be the proclaimers of good news, they had to learn how to love each other, take care of one another. In many ways, John's people were not that much different from the community we heard about in Acts that Diana read. As more people and different people were drawn into these new Christian communities, guess what? There was tension. There were urgent questions about who could be a follower and who could not. What were the limits? What were the rules? What is okay to eat and not eat? And what about circumcision? The vision from God that Peter received seemed to suggest that these questions are not easy ones in God's newly expansive kingdom of Jews and Gentiles, men and women, slave and free. The Acts community learns that Jesus' command to love is not only that we love those already in our community, but to love others into community, even those people considered unclean and unworthy. Now, the history of the church suggests that this seemingly simple command from Jesus is incredibly hard to do. Christians have hardly ever played well together for very long. Today, you are sitting in a church that was made possible more than 500 years ago by a split in the Christian church called the Reformation. It was the split responsible for the Presbyterian Church, among others. And it was also a split that fueled a bloody, horrible holy war that rocked the European continent for more than a century. There are divisions among us, and it has ever been so. This morning, you are worshiping in a church that belongs to just one of hundreds of Protestant denominations, not including the many more hundreds of affiliated and non-affiliated Christian churches in the United States. There are divisions among us, and it has ever been so. When I traveled to South Sudan 7 years ago, I learned a hard truth about that war-torn nation. After they gained independence from the Islamic government of Sudan, the Christians in the new nation of South Sudan no longer had to fight their Muslim neighbors. So they turned against each other, tribe against tribe, Christian against Christian. The president of the South Sudan Catholic Bishops' Council said, "We insist that South Sudan has the highest number of churchgoers. The paradox is that all these people go to the church, but then you find the majority of them still go back to kill each other, to fight. And you ask yourself, why do these people go to church?" So we are praying for this miracle that we get converted truly to God and be able to forgive and be able to stay with one another. There are divisions among us, and it has ever been so. We live in a still majority Christian country which violently revolted against another Christian country in order to become a new nation. We live in a country which became so divided on the question of slavery that we went to war with one another, North against South, brother against brother, Christians killing Christians. And even today, there are those that say our nation is so divided that the only way our differences can be settled is another civil war. There are divisions, and it has ever been so. Well, if you ask me, the history of Christianity is a lot like the famous parable of the porcupines in the cold. A group of porcupines finds itself without shelter on a winter's day. The animals huddle together for warmth, but recoil in pain as they stick one another. And there they remain, shuffling back and forth, exchanging one fleeting comfort for another, seeking in vain a companionship that does not hurt, a solitude that does not freeze. I think the church is a lot like those porcupines. We also huddle together for warmth and then shuffle away again in pain, always separating and congregating. The Christian era seems to be a long period of imagining that life would be lovely if only it weren't for that pesky porcupine who keeps showing up to our fellowship. And we somehow forget all of us are porcupines, right? I've yet to meet a human being that doesn't possess at least a couple of rather sharp edges that I find annoying. You can call those sin if you like, but all of us have at least a few pointed quills. I have them, you have them. And what we imagine as protection from pain is also the thing that separates us from each other and from God. One of the reasons I'm grateful, believe it or not, for Facebook, despite all its downside and its power to distract me from what I should be doing, is that social media has reacquainted me with people I haven't seen in decades. I hear a lot of people say the same thing. I can talk to my high school friends. I can talk to my college friends. Many of the people who knew me in high school and college, and even back when I was in advertising, are surprised, stunned really, to find out I'm a minister in the Presbyterian Church, USA. After they get over that initial shock, they all seem compelled to want to tell me why they don't go to church anymore. And these are not Gen Xers, millennials, we're all in our late 50s, early 60s now. And all of us grew up in that golden age. You remember it. Everybody went to worship and Sunday school and vacation Bible school. We played church league basketball. But most of my Facebook friends aren't involved in organized religion of any sort anymore. They are done. But they still love to talk to me about God and other churchy things. Some talk about how hard it was to detach themselves from toxic childhood faith traditions and how the scars haven't quite healed. Some of them abandoned the church when they realized their sexual orientation had to be hidden or prayed away for them to be accepted. Some found their churches to be overly patriarchal and unwilling to accept women in leadership. Many of my Catholic friends simply can't get over their disgust about how abuse by priests was covered up and denied. Some of them raised children with disabilities or other behavioral issues, and they felt their kids weren't welcome in Sunday school, so it's just easier to stay home. But what is maybe the most frustrating, maybe the most encouraging, is that most of my friends who left the church are not done with Jesus. According to research, most people consider themselves people of faith and want desperately to stay engaged with God. But very little of what they experience in the church looks or feels like the love of Jesus. Such a seemingly simple commandment, right? Love one another. Why is it so hard to do? Maybe, I think, it's because we find it much easier to care sometimes about strangers in the abstract than the people closest to us. Jesus knew that the closer his followers got to one another, the more they would find themselves in conflict after he was gone. Maybe it's because loving like Jesus means sacrificing something about ourselves for the sake of the gospel, but it's not a one and done kind of sacrifice. It's not that dramatic. It's personal, it's particular, and very often it's very hard work. So on the last night of his life on earth, Jesus decided to show his disciples what kind of love he was talking about. Jesus got down on his hands and knees and washed the stinky feet of the ones he loved to the end. He showed them what it looks like to love, so everyone could see the glory of God once the human Jesus left the earth. Glory in the worldview of John doesn't mean bright lights and fireworks. Glory means revealing what is true. It means being able to see God's purposes in the person of Jesus. And those purposes come into focus in a dirty water basin, the blood-stained cross, and in a Savior who poured himself out for the sake of the ones he loved to the end. And Jesus continues to be glorified through the power of the Spirit when you and I act for the good of one another. When I consult with churches, one of the things I tell leaders again and again is that ultimately, what will matter most is not what they decide to do, start a new program, go on a mission trip, sell their property, plant a new church, create a new outdoor space. Those may all be good things to do. But in the end, what will matter most is not what we do, but how we do it. That's what everyone we hope to reach with the good news of Jesus Christ will see. How do we listen to one another when opinions are divided? How do we treat one another when the stakes are really high? How open are we to the ideas of those who historically have not had a place at the table? How willing are we to stick together when things get tough? Like Paul said, if I speak in the tongues of mortals and angels but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but don't have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Friends, I believe in our lifetimes there has never been a moment when the odds are so stacked against the building of beloved communities. Seriously, friends, the odds don't look very good to me, and I'm probably one of the most hopeful people you've ever met. But on the other hand, it seems to me there's never been a more urgent need for beloved communities everywhere. Dr. King said this about the kind of community we are called by Jesus to build together here in Ben Avon, despite all odds to the contrary. The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It is this type of understanding goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of all people. Thanks be to God. Amen.